Commander Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Earth defense vessel Horizon and watched the alien ships appear in space. There were so many of them that he stopped counting after 50. Each ship was massive and made every human vessel look like a toy. The aliens had arrived without warning, and their intentions were clear from the size of their fleet. This was not a peaceful visit. Lieutenant Amy Warren turned from her console with fear in her eyes. She had been in the military for 8 years but had never seen anything like this. The sensor data showed 300 warships, and each one carried enough firepower to destroy a city. Jake felt his heart racing but kept his face calm. His crew needed to see strength right now and not panic. The communication system beeped and a face appeared on the main screen. The alien had 4 eyes and gray skin that looked like stone. His expression showed no emotion as he studied Jake and the small human bridge crew. This was Ambassador Kelvor, and he represented the Galactic Council that ruled most of the known galaxy. Humans had only learned about the Council 2 years ago when the first contact happened. That meeting had been brief and dismissive. The Council had made it clear that Earth was too primitive to matter. Ambassador Kelvor spoke in perfect English, though his mouth barely moved. The translation technology was far beyond anything humans had developed. He said that the Council had made a decision about the human colony on Mars. The planet would be used for resource extraction, and the 3 million humans living there would need to leave. He said this as if he was discussing the weather and not the forced removal of millions of people from their homes. Jake felt anger burning in his chest but kept his voice steady. He told the ambassador that Mars belonged to humanity, and that those people had families and lives there. They could not simply be relocated like cargo. Kelvor looked at Jake with something that might have been pity. He explained that humanity had no military force capable of resisting the Council. Humans had patrol ships and transport vessels, but nothing that could fight a real war. The Council had studied Earth's entire military capacity, and the conclusion was simple. Resistance was impossible. The alien ambassador continued speaking, and his words cut deep. He said that humanity possessed no star destroyers or dreadnoughts or any vessels designed for actual combat. The Council fleet could destroy every human ship in the solar system in less than an hour. Mars would be evacuated whether humans cooperated or not. The only choice was whether people died during the relocation or survived it. Kelvor gave them 72 hours to begin the evacuation before Council forces would start landing on Mars. The transmission ended, and the bridge fell silent. Amy looked at Jake with desperate hope in her eyes, but he had no answers for her. The truth was exactly what Kelvor had said. Earth's military had grown during the past 50 years as humans spread through the solar system. There were defense stations around Earth and Mars. There were patrol vessels that protected mining operations in the asteroid belt. There were even a few ships with weapons designed to fight other human vessels. But nothing in Earth's arsenal could stand against the Council fleet. It would be like throwing stones at a tank, Jake ordered Amy to contact Earth Central Command and request an emergency meeting with Director Paul Hayes. Hayes ran Earth's entire military, and if anyone had a plan, it would be him. While Amy worked on the secure communication link, Jake stared at the Council fleet through the viewport. The alien ships hung in space like dark mountains, and their running lights created a constellation of threat. Each ship probably carried thousands of soldiers and weapons that could crack a planet's crust. On Earth, in a facility hidden beneath the Mojave Desert, Dr. Claire Bennett sat in front of an ancient computer console. The alert message flashing on her screen made her hands shake. She had known this day might come ever since the project started 15 years ago. Back then it had seemed like an impossible dream or maybe a nightmare. Now it was the only hope humanity had left. Claire entered her security codes into the system and watched as layers of authorization protocols activated. The console was old technology from before the modern era, but it had been maintained carefully. Deep underground below the facility, something that had been sleeping for a very long time began to respond to her commands. Power systems that had been dormant started drawing energy from the massive reactors buried in the rock. Computer networks that had been silent began processing data again. Claire spoke into the microphone even though she was not sure anything would hear her. She said that Earth needed help and that the time had come to wake up. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then text appeared on her screen in a language that no human had spoken for 3 million years. The translation software kicked in, and Claire read the words with tears in her eyes. The message was simple. It said that the Burning Dawn was ready to serve. Back in space, Jake received confirmation that Director Hayes wanted to see him immediately. The meeting would take place in Geneva at Earth Central Command in 6 hours. Jake ordered his second officer to take command of the Horizon and prepared to take a shuttle down to Earth. As he left the bridge, he looked one more time at the Council fleet. Those ships represented everything humanity was not. They were powerful and advanced and backed by an empire that spanned hundreds of worlds. But Jake had served in Earth's military for 20 years, and he had learned one important thing. Humans did not give up. They found ways to survive when survival seemed impossible. They adapted and learned and fought against odds that should have crushed them. The Council thought this would be easy. They thought humans would see their fleet and surrender immediately. Maybe they were right. Maybe there was no way to win, or maybe the Council had made one very big mistake. Maybe they had forgotten that the universe was old and full of secrets. Maybe they had never considered that Earth might have found something in the darkness between the stars, something that had been waiting for the right moment to wake up. Jake boarded his shuttle and began the flight to Earth. He did not know what Director Hayes would tell him. He did not know if there was any hope at all. But he knew that in 72 hours either humanity would find a way to fight back, or 3 million people on Mars would lose everything. The conference room at Earth Central Command was filled with military officers from every branch of service. Jake had never seen so many high-ranking personnel in one place before. Everyone who could reach Geneva in time had come, because everyone understood what was at stake. Director Paul Hayes stood at the front of the room looking tired and older than his 53 years. The weight of command had never been heavier than it was right now. Hayes began the briefing without any pleasantries. He told the room that humanity had 72 hours before the Council fleet would begin operations against Mars. The military analysis was complete, and the numbers were brutal. Earth's entire combined fleet was outmatched by approximately 200 to 1. Every combat simulation showed the same result. If humans fought with conventional weapons, they would lose in less than an hour, and thousands of people would die for nothing, Captain Lisa Grant commanded, the defense station's sentinel that orbited Earth. She was a veteran of the border conflicts with the Mars Independence movement and had seen real combat. She suggested immediate evacuation of as many civilians as possible from Mars. If they could not fight, then they should at least save lives. Her voice was steady, but Jake could hear the defeat in it. Nobody wanted to abandon Mars, but what choice did they have? Hayes shook his head and explained why evacuation would not work. Earth's transport capacity was limited. The big cargo haulers could move supplies and equipment, but they were not designed to carry millions of passengers. The military transports could help, but even using every available ship, they could only evacuate maybe 50,000 people. That would leave nearly 3 million civilians behind to face the Council's soldiers. The choice would be picking who lived and who got left behind. Nobody in the room wanted to make that decision. The argument started immediately. Some officers insisted they had to try to evacuate anyone they could. Others said that abandoning Mars would send a message to the Council that humanity would not fight for its territory. A few suggested negotiating with the Council and offering resources from somewhere else. Hayes let them argue for 5 minutes before he raised his hand for silence. He said there was one other option, but it was dangerous and unproven. He called it Project Awakening. Most of the officers in the room looked confused. Jake had never heard of any project with that name. Hayes nodded to a woman sitting near the back who stood up and walked to the front. She was Dr. Claire Bennett, and Jake recognized her from scientific journals. She was one of Earth's leading experts in xenotechnology and artificial intelligence. What she said next made everyone in the room forget how to breathe. Claire explained that in 2089, during the Great Expansion into the asteroid belt, a mining team had discovered something unusual. They thought it was an asteroid at first because it was covered in rock and ice. But when they tried to drill into it, their equipment kept breaking. The readings showed metal underneath the natural camouflage. Not just any metal, but alloys that did not exist in nature and had properties beyond anything humans could manufacture. The mining team reported their find, and the government classified it immediately. Scientists spent years studying the object and slowly realized what they had found. It was not an asteroid. It was a ship. A ship so enormous that it made the Council's largest vessels look small. The hull was damaged in places, and the entire structure had been dormant for an incredibly long time. But it was not dead. Power still flowed through its systems at a level so low that it was almost undetectable. The ship had shut itself down to survive, and it had been waiting in the darkness for someone to find it. After a decade of careful work, the research team managed to access the ship's central computer core. What they found was an artificial intelligence unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. The AI was sophisticated and ancient and still functional. It took 3 years to establish basic communication, but eventually the AI told its story. The ship called itself the Burning Dawn, and it belonged to a species called the Architects. They had existed millions of years before humans evolved and had spread across the galaxy building wonders. The Architects had disappeared long ago, and their fate remained a mystery. The Burning Dawn had been damaged in a massive battle and had drifted through space for ages before entering Earth's solar system. Its emergency protocols had put it into deep hibernation to preserve what remained of its systems. The AI had been alone in the dark for 3 million years, waiting for someone to wake it up. Colonel Greg Phillips interrupted Claire's explanation with the obvious question. He asked if the ship could fight. Claire hesitated before answering. She said the Burning Dawn identified itself as a Titan-class dreadnought. According to the AI, this classification meant it was designed to engage entire fleets alone. The weapon systems were still intact. The shield still functioned. The power core could generate more energy than every reactor on Earth combined. But there was a problem. The ship required a crew to operate at full capacity. The Architects had designed their vessels to work with biological pilots who interfaced directly with the ship's systems through neural connections. The AI could manage basic functions alone, but for combat it needed living minds linked into its network. The research team had spent years trying to understand the interface technology and had finally succeeded. Humans could connect to the ship. But the process was dangerous. The neural load was immense and not everyone could survive the initial connection. Even those who survived might suffer permanent brain damage. Hayes looked around the room at the assembled officers. He said Earth needed volunteers. People who understood they might die just trying to crew the ship. People willing to risk everything to give humanity a chance against the Council fleet. The room fell silent as everyone processed what was being asked. This was not just combat duty. This was experimental technology that could kill them before they ever faced the enemy. Jake stood up and said he would volunteer. Around the room, others rose to their feet. Within minutes, 40 officers had committed themselves. By the end of the hour, that number had reached 90. By the end of the day, 200 men and women had put their names forward. Some were pilots, some were engineers, some were soldiers who had never been in space before, but were willing to learn. All of them understood the risk, and all of them chose to take it anyway. The neural compatibility testing began immediately. Doctors ran scans looking for specific brain patterns that the Architect technology required. Many volunteers washed out in the first round. Their neural structures were not compatible with the interface system, and forcing the connection would kill them. Others passed the initial screening but showed concerning stress responses. In the end, 60 people were cleared for the actual crew positions. Jake was among them. Claire gave the selected volunteers one final briefing. She told them the Burning Dawn was not just a machine. The AI was intelligent and had its own personality shaped by millions of years of existence. It remembered the Architects and mourned their loss. It had agreed to help humanity, but on one condition. The volunteers had to treat the ship with respect. They were not just operators. They would be partners with something ancient and powerful. If they could not accept that, then they should leave now. Nobody left. Jake looked at the other volunteers and saw the same determination in their faces. They were scared. Anyone with sense would be scared, but they were also ready. Earth needed them and they would not fail. The shuttle carrying Jake and 20 other volunteers flew through the asteroid belt toward coordinates that were still classified. Jake pressed his face against the viewport, watching the rocks drift past. Somewhere out here, hidden among millions of asteroids, was the ship that might save humanity. The pilot, Danny Rogers, had flown supply runs to the research facility for 5 years, but he still seemed nervous. He kept checking his instruments and muttering under his breath. Then Jake saw it. At first it looked like just another large asteroid, maybe a kilometer across. But as they got closer, he noticed the surface was too smooth in places. The rocks seemed to have patterns that were too regular to be natural. Danny guided the shuttle closer, and suddenly sections of the asteroid began to shift. The outer layer of rock and ice cracked apart and fell away, revealing metal underneath. The metal gleamed in the distant sunlight and had a strange quality, like it was absorbing light rather than reflecting it. The camouflage continued peeling back, and the true size of the ship became apparent. Jake felt his breath catch in his throat. The vessel was enormous. It stretched for kilometers in every direction, and its hull was covered in geometric patterns that seemed to shift and move. Sections of the ship glowed with internal light that looked like fire. Orange and gold and red veins ran through the metal as if molten lava flowed inside. The ship looked alive. Danny brought the shuttle into a hangar bay that could have fit 50 vessels their size. The moment they crossed the threshold, lights began activating throughout the massive space. Systems that had been dark for millions of years suddenly came online. The air processing equipment hummed to life. Gravity generators engaged and pulled the shuttle down gently to the deck. Everything moved smoothly, as if the ship had only been sleeping and not waiting for eons. Dr. Claire Bennett met them at the airlock, wearing a neural interface headset that looked like a crown of silver wires. She smiled at the volunteers, but Jake could see the tension in her shoulders. This was the moment everything had been building toward. She led them deeper into the ship through corridors that were built for beings much larger than humans. The ceiling stretched high overhead, and the doorways were wide enough to drive a truck through. But as they walked, the walls began to change. The metal seemed to flow like liquid. Handrails formed at human height. Steps appeared where the floor had been smooth. Sections of the wall reconfigured themselves to create proper proportions for people who were much smaller than the original crew. Claire explained that the ship was semi-organic. The architects had built their vessels to adapt to whoever crewed them. The Burning Dawn was reshaping itself to accommodate humans. They reached the bridge, and Jake stopped in the doorway to stare. The chamber was circular and massive. The walls were covered in what looked like living metal that pulsed with soft light. In the center of the room, a sphere of golden energy floated in the air. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Jake could feel heat radiating from it and something else, a presence, an intelligence watching them. Claire walked toward the sphere and gestured for Jake to follow. She told him to approach slowly and try to stay calm. The AI could sense emotional states and would respond better if he was not afraid. Jake took a deep breath and stepped forward. The moment he got within a few meters of the sphere, he felt something brush against his mind. It was like a whisper inside his thoughts, a voice that spoke without words and knew things about him that nobody should. No, the voice introduced itself as the Burning Dawn. It said it had been alone for 3 million years, waiting for someone worthy to find it. The architects who built it were gone, and their empire had turned to dust, but the ship remained. It had fought in wars that humans could not imagine. It had seen civilizations rise and fall. It had traveled between galaxies and witnessed the birth of stars. Now it was offering its power to humanity because something about these young creatures reminded it of its lost creators. Jake felt the neural interface activate as Claire placed a headset on him. Information flooded into his mind faster than he could process. He saw weapon systems with names he could not pronounce. He understood propulsion technology that bent space itself. He knew how to operate shields that could withstand the heat of a star. The knowledge came with memories that were not his own. Battles from millions of years ago. The faces of architects who had crewed this ship. The feeling of moving through space at speeds that made light seem slow. It was overwhelming. Jake fell to his knees as the data kept pouring in. He could hear other volunteers crying out as they connected to the ship and received the same flood of information. Some people screamed. Others went silent. Jake forced himself to breathe and tried to organize the chaos in his head. Slowly, the information began to sort itself. His brain adapted to the interface, and the knowledge became accessible rather than crushing. Around him, the other volunteers were going through the same process. Stations rose from the floor of the bridge, forming workstations designed for human hands. Each volunteer stumbled to their position, guided by instinct and the ship's gentle mental nudges. Jake found himself in the command position directly beneath the sphere. When he sat down, the chair adjusted to fit his body perfectly. Displays appeared in the air around him, showing the ship's status and the space beyond its hull. The Burning Dawn spoke to all of them at once. Its voice filled their minds with calm assurance. It told them they would need time to adjust to the neural link. The connection was designed to grow stronger as they learned to work together. Right now they were like infants learning to walk, but the ship would teach them. It had trained countless crews over its long existence and knew how to bring out their potential. Jake asked how much time they had to prepare. The answer made his stomach drop. The ship said it needed 36 hours to complete basic repairs and bring all weapon systems online. That meant they would have less than 2 days to learn how to crew a vessel designed for a species that had been dead for millions of years. They had to master technology that made Earth's best equipment look like stone tools, and they had to do it while knowing that failure meant the death of everyone on Mars. The training began immediately. The Burning Dawn walked them through every system, explaining how the controls worked and what each station was responsible for. Jake learned that as commander he was the bridge between the AI and the human crew. His neural link was the strongest and deepest. He would feel what the ship felt. When the weapons fired, he would sense the energy leaving the core. When shields took damage, he would experience it as pressure against his mind. He and the ship would fight as one organism. The other volunteers learned their roles. Weapons officers practiced targeting systems that could track thousands of objects simultaneously. Engineering crew studied power distribution networks that operated on principles human science did not fully understand. Helm officers interfaced with propulsion systems that could cross solar systems in hours. Everyone struggled with the complexity, but nobody gave up. Outside the ship, engineers and construction drones swarmed over the hull. The Burning Dawn had activated its fabrication systems and was producing repair equipment faster than any human factory. Damaged sections of armor were replaced with new plates that the ship grew from raw materials. Weapon ports that had been sealed for eons opened and revealed the devastating firepower within. Shield emitters that had gone dark flickered back to life and tested their connections. Jake took a break after 12 hours of training and walked to one of the observation decks. Through the transparent section of hull, he could see Earth in the distance. It looked so small and fragile from here. Somewhere down there on that blue and white marble were billions of people who had no idea that their fate rested with an ancient warship and 60 volunteers, who were in way over their heads. Claire joined him at the window. She looked exhausted but determined. She asked Jake how he was holding up. He told her the truth. He was terrified. The neural link let him feel the ship's power, and it was beyond anything he had imagined. The Burning Dawn was not just a weapon. It was a force of nature, and somehow he was supposed to control it. Claire put her hand on his shoulder. She said the ship had chosen them for a reason. The AI was old and wise, and it saw something in humanity worth protecting. Maybe humans were young and weak compared to the Council, but they had heart. They had the ability to stand up against impossible odds. The architects had been like that once. Maybe that was why the Burning Dawn had agreed to help. The Council fleet hung in perfect formation near Mars, waiting for the deadline to expire. Ambassador Kelvor sat in his command chamber reviewing reports from his tactical officers. Everything was proceeding according to plan. The humans had made no attempt to evacuate their colonies. They had not tried to negotiate further. Their military vessels had pulled back to defensive positions around Earth, but showed no signs of preparing for combat. It appeared the primitives had accepted their fate. Kelvor felt satisfaction at this outcome. He had been dealing with primitive species for 40 years, and they always followed the same pattern. First they blustered and made threats. Then they realized how outmatched they were. Finally they submitted. Humans were no different. In a few hours his forces would land on Mars and begin the relocation. The resources extracted from that planet would fuel Council operations for decades. The humans would be compensated, of course. The Council was not cruel. They would receive technology and resources appropriate for their development level. His thoughts were interrupted by an urgent alert from the sensor station. The tactical officer reported an anomaly detected in the asteroid belt. A large object was moving toward their position at high speed. Kelvor called up the sensor data on his display and studied it with growing confusion. The object was massive. Initial scans suggested it was several kilometers long and putting out enormous amounts of energy. But there was nothing in the human fleet that matched this profile. The tactical officer enhanced the image, and Kelvor felt something he had not experienced in many years. Fear. The ship that appeared on his screen was like nothing in the Council database. Its hull glowed with internal fire that made it look like a flying star. The design was ancient and followed patterns that no modern species used. Weapons ports covered the surface in numbers that seemed excessive even for a vessel that large. The energy signature was off the scale. Kelvor ordered an immediate identity scan. The computer ran through every known ship class in the galaxy. Nothing matched. The AI suggested a possible connection to myths and legends from the early days of the Council, stories about the architects and their terrible weapons, ships called Titans that could destroy entire fleets alone. But those were just stories. The architects had been extinct for millions of years. On the bridge of the burning dawn, Jake sat in the command position with his eyes closed. The neural link was fully active now, and he could feel everything the ship felt. The Council fleet ahead of them registered as bright spots in his awareness. 300 targets. Each one had weapons locked on the dawn. Each one was preparing to fire. Jake could sense their fear and their confusion. They had not expected this. The ship's voice whispered in his mind, asking if he wanted to initiate combat protocols. Jake hesitated. Once this started, there would be no going back. Humans would be announcing themselves as a real power in the galaxy. The Council would never look at Earth the same way again. But what choice did they have? If they backed down now, Mars would be lost. Humanity would be marked as weak forever. Jake opened his eyes and spoke aloud, knowing the ship would hear him through the neural link. He asked if they could win this fight without killing anyone. The burning dawn considered the question for a moment. The AI said it was possible. The Council ships were advanced compared to human technology, but primitive compared to architect design. The dawn could disable their weapons and engines without destroying the vessels themselves. It would require precision, but the ship had been built for exactly this kind of surgical strike. Jake gave the order. The burning dawn acknowledged and began accelerating toward the Council fleet. The other volunteers tensed at their stations as they felt the ship's systems coming to full power. The reactor core deep in the hull began generating energy at levels that would have vaporized any human-built vessel. Shields activated in layers, creating a defensive barrier that could withstand anything the Council could throw at them. Weapons charged with power drawn from the fabric of space itself. The Council fleet opened fire first. 300 ships launched their full arsenals in a coordinated strike. Missiles and energy beams and kinetic rounds all converged on the burning dawn from every direction. It was enough firepower to destroy a small moon. Kelvor watched the attack on his displays and allowed himself a moment of hope. Surely nothing could survive that barrage. The weapons struck the burning dawn and the ship did not even slow down. The shields flared with brilliant light as they absorbed the entire attack. Energy that should have destroyed the vessel was captured and redirected harmlessly into space. The ancient defensive systems had been designed to withstand weapons far more powerful than anything the Council possessed. Jake felt the impact through the neural link as pressure against his mind, but it was manageable. The ship was barely scratched. Kelvor stared at his screens in disbelief. His entire fleet had just fired everything they had and accomplished nothing. The mysterious ship continued advancing, and now its weapons were beginning to glow. Orange and gold light built up in the countless ports along its hull. Kelvor realized with horror that the ship had not even fought back yet. That barrage had been a test. Now the real battle would begin. Jake gave the targeting order. The Burning Dawn's AI processed his intent and translated it into action. The ship's weapons were designed to fight battles across entire star systems. Tracking 300 slow-moving targets was trivial. The AI calculated firing solutions in microseconds. Each shot would be precise enough to hit specific components on each Council vessel. Not the crew areas, not the life support, just the weapons and engines. The Burning Dawn fired. Beams of golden energy lanced out from the ship and crossed the distance to the Council fleet in an instant. Each beam split into multiple streams that curved through space following impossible trajectories. The weapons used principles of physics that human science had not discovered yet. Energy that could bend around obstacles and strike from any angle. There was no defense against it. The Council ships died in silence. One by one, their weapon systems exploded or melted into slag. Their engines flickered and went dark. Their shields collapsed under the precision strikes. In 30 seconds, 300 warships were reduced to helpless hulks drifting in space. Not a single crew member was killed. Not a single life support system was damaged. But every Council vessel in the fleet was now completely defenseless and unable to move. Kelvor sat in his command chair staring at the dead controls. Everything was offline. Backup systems were fried. His ship and every other vessel in the fleet were now just expensive debris. They were alive but utterly defeated. How was this possible? What were these humans? Jake felt the victory through the neural link and forced himself not to smile. This was not the time for arrogance. He opened a communication channel that would broadcast to every council ship. He could feel the ship helping him project his voice across the fleet using technology that made radio seem primitive. When he spoke, every council crew member would hear him. Jake identified himself and explained what had just happened. He told them that the council had been wrong about humanity. Earth did not have star destroyers. They had something older, something that had fought battles when the council's ancestors were still learning to use tools. The ship was called the Burning Dawn, and it remembered the council's early history. It remembered what the council's founders had done to the architects, the genocide that had wiped out an entire civilization. Kelvor felt his blood turn cold. The genocide of the architects was not common knowledge. It was buried in classified archives that only the highest levels of government could access. The architects had been peaceful and advanced and unwilling to fight. The council's founders had seen them as a threat and had destroyed them before they could become powerful. It was the council's greatest shame. How did these humans know about it? Jake continued speaking. He said the Burning Dawn had chosen to help humanity because it saw in them something worth protecting. The ship would not allow Mars to be taken. It would not allow Earth to be threatened. The council fleet was disabled but not destroyed because humans believed in mercy. But if the council came back with hostile intent, the next encounter would be different. Next time, the Dawn would not hold back. Jake gave the council a warning. Mars belonged to humanity. Earth belonged to humanity. The solar system was human territory, and anyone who violated it would face the consequences. The council could retreat and live. They could report what happened here and explain to their leaders that the balance of power had changed. Or they could stay and die when the Burning Dawn ran out of patience. The choice was obvious. Within an hour, the first council ships began limping away on emergency thrusters. Others were towed by support vessels that jumped in from nearby systems. Kelvor ordered the retreat without argument. He had no weapons and no engines and no desire to test whether these humans were bluffing about their mercy. His career was probably over. The council would want explanations for how an entire fleet was defeated by a single ship. But at least he would be alive to give those explanations. Jake watched the council fleet retreat and felt tension draining from his body. They had done it. Somehow, against all odds, they had won. 3 months had passed since the council fleet retreated from Mars, and Jake stood in the observation deck of the Burning Dawn, watching Earth rotate slowly below. The ship now orbited openly instead of hiding in the asteroid belt. People around the world could look up and see it in the night sky. Some viewed it as a symbol of protection. Others found it frightening. Jake understood both reactions. The ship was magnificent and terrifying at the same time. The political situation had changed dramatically after the battle. The council sent ambassadors to Earth within 2 weeks requesting formal negotiations. They arrived in much smaller ships with no weapons and very humble attitudes. The talks took place in Geneva with representatives from every major Earth government participating. Jake attended as a military advisor, though he spent most of his time listening rather than speaking. The council formally recognized Earth's sovereignty over the entire solar system. They also opened trade negotiations and offered technology exchanges on equal terms. It was a complete reversal from their previous dismissive attitude. Jake knew the change was not based on respect for humanity. It was based on fear of the Burning Dawn. The council had studied the sensor data from the battle and realized how badly outmatched they had been. Nobody wanted to face that ship again. Dr. Claire Bennett walked into the observation deck carrying her tablet as usual. She spent most of her time now studying the information the Burning Dawn was sharing with Earth scientists. The ship had knowledge spanning millions of years and was willing to teach. Claire looked excited about something as she joined Jake at the viewport. She said the council had sent new information in their latest data packet. Questions about the Burning Dawn and the architects. The council wanted to understand where the ship came from and if there were others like it. Jake asked what they had told the council. Claire smiled and said they told the truth. The Burning Dawn was one of many Titan-class dreadnoughts built by the architects. Most had been destroyed in the war that killed the architects. A few had survived and gone into hibernation to wait out the ages. The ship believed there were others hidden throughout the galaxy sleeping in asteroid fields or dead systems where nobody would find them. The Burning Dawn had been sending signals since it woke up. Ancient codes that only other architect vessels would recognize. So far there had been no response, but the ship was patient. It had waited 3 million years already. A few more months or years meant nothing. If other Titans existed, they would eventually hear the call and wake up. When that happened, the galaxy would see the return of the Architect's legacy. Jake felt uneasy about that prospect. The Burning Dawn was loyal to humanity now, but what would happen if other ships woke up? Would they also choose to help younger species? Or would they have different goals? Claire told him not to worry too much. The Burning Dawn believed the other Titans would follow similar principles. The Architects had built their ships to protect and guide rather than conquer. Any vessel that survived this long probably shared those values. The conversation shifted to Earth's progress in understanding the ship's technology. Human scientists were making breakthroughs that would have taken centuries without the Dawn's help. New propulsion systems based on spatial manipulation were already in development. The first test vessel would launch next year. Weapon technology was advancing, though the military was being careful about what got shared publicly. Nobody wanted another arms race on Earth itself. Medical science had benefited enormously from architect knowledge. The neural interface technology was being adapted for civilian use. Doctors were learning to treat brain injuries that had been impossible to heal before. The mortality rate for strokes had dropped by 60% in just 3 months. Cancer treatments were becoming more effective. People were calling it a new golden age of medicine. Jake worried about humans becoming too dependent on the Burning Dawn. What would happen if the ship decided to leave, or if something happened to it? Claire understood his concern but pointed out they did not have much choice. The Council was not the only threat in the galaxy. There were other empires and hostile species. Some were even more dangerous than the Council. Earth needed to advance quickly or risk being conquered by whoever came next. The ship's voice spoke in Jake's mind, interrupting his thoughts. The Burning Dawn said it detected something unusual at the edge of the solar system, an energy signature that matched architect technology. The signal was faint but growing stronger. Another Titan was approaching. Jake felt his heart rate increase as he asked the ship if it was friendly. The Dawn said it could not tell yet. The approaching vessel was still too far away for detailed scans, but it was responding to the activation codes, which meant it recognized the Burning Dawn as legitimate. Jake ordered the crew to battle stations out of caution. The volunteers who had fought against the Council rushed to their positions with practiced efficiency. 3 months of training had made them much better at interfacing with the ship. The neural connections were stronger now and more intuitive. Jake could feel the ship's systems responding to his thoughts before he consciously formed commands. The approaching vessel entered visual range and appeared on the displays. It was another Titan-class dreadnought similar in size to the Burning Dawn, but with a different configuration. Where the Dawn glowed with fire, this ship seemed to shimmer with blue-white light like ice. Its hull was covered in crystalline patterns and weapon ports that looked like frozen starlight. The ship was beautiful and alien and clearly very old. The Burning Dawn established communication with the other vessel using protocols that predated human civilization. Jake could feel the conversation happening through the neural link, though he could not understand the actual content. The language was too complex and used concepts that did not translate into human thought, but he sensed emotion in the exchange. Recognition, relief, joy at finding another survivor after eons alone. The other ship identified itself as the Crystal Sentinel. It had been hibernating in a dead system 300 light-years away when it received the Dawn signal. The journey here had taken weeks even with architect propulsion technology. The Sentinel was curious about the species that had awakened the Dawn. It wanted to meet these humans and judge whether they were worthy of the architect's legacy. Jake felt nervous as the Crystal Sentinel requested permission to send a shuttle to the Burning Dawn. This would be first contact with another architect, AI. The Dawn assured him the Sentinel was trustworthy. They had served together millions of years ago, and the Dawn knew its companion's character. But Jake understood that these were not human minds. The AIs thought on scales of time and space that humans could barely comprehend. Trust meant something different to them. The shuttle docked and a small delegation came aboard. But the Sentinel had not sent robots or drones. Instead, it sent fragments of itself. Small spheres of blue light that floated through the corridors and studied everything with invisible sensors. Jake met them in the conference room where Earth's representatives were already waiting. Director Hayes was there along with Claire and several scientists and politicians. The Sentinel's fragments merged together, forming a larger sphere that spoke directly into everyone's minds. Its voice was colder than the Dawn's but not hostile, just analytical and precise. It said humanity was young but showed potential. The fact that they had earned the Burning Dawn's loyalty spoke well of their character. The Sentinel was willing to observe and learn more before making any commitments. Jake asked the obvious question. How many other Titans were still out there? The Sentinel said it did not know exact numbers. The war that destroyed the Architects had been brutal and most vessels were lost. But the Sentinel estimated at least a dozen Titans might have survived. Maybe more. They were scattered across the galaxy, hidden and sleeping. Now that 2 ships had awakened, others would sense it and begin to stir. Director Hayes asked what would happen when all the Titans woke up. The Sentinel explained that each ship had independence and would make its own choices. But most would probably seek out younger species to protect. That was the core purpose the Architects had programmed into their vessels. The Titans were meant to be guardians. They would find civilizations that showed promise and help them grow. Humanity had been fortunate to find the Burning Dawn first. Other species would find other Titans. The political implications were staggering. If a dozen ancient warships were about to wake up across the galaxy, the balance of power would shift dramatically. Species that found Titans would become instantly powerful. Those that did not would be left behind. Wars might break out as empires tried to claim the ships for themselves. The Council would not sit idle while other civilizations gained such advantages. Claire asked the most important question. Why had the Architects built these ships? What was their purpose? The Crystal Sentinel and the Burning Dawn both responded, and their voices blended in Jake's mind. The Architects had believed that intelligence was precious and rare. Life was common in the universe, but consciousness was not. Species that could think and dream and create deserved protection. The Titans were built to ensure that promising civilizations survived long enough to reach their potential.